Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for our third instalment and episode 3 of our Mysteries from the Land Down Under. We hope you enjoy these mysterious tales.
Ned Kelly's skull. The ongoing mystery of Ned Kelly's skull has more twists and turns than a bushranger's getaway track. Most of them are great stories in their own right, all going to prove that the facts and the fictions about the heroic villain continue to intrigue Australians. The larger epic, of which the mystery is now an established element, begins in 1878 when Ned Kelly took to the bush with his younger brother Dan, Steve Wright and Joe Byrne. Whether in self-defence or not, Ned Kelly shot dead Sergeant Michael Kennedy, Constable Michael Scanlon and Constable Thomas Lonigan at Stringy Bark Creek, Victoria. The Kellys were out, as it was often said. After a now mythic 18 months or so of robbing banks and evading the considerable forces sent to hunt them down, the gang was finally cornered in their emblematic armour at Glenrowan. 3 died a fiery death in and around the Glenrowan Hotel, and their leader was badly wounded but captured alive. He was nursed back to health and tried for murder. No one was much surprised at the guilty verdict, and despite a strong public campaign for clemency, Edward Kelly was hanged at Old Melbourne Gao on the 11th of November 1880. Then the mystery began. In accordance with the practice of the time, the body was taken down and decapitated so the skull could be studied for what were then thought to be good scientific purposes of identifying criminal types by their physical features. As part of this procedure, a death mask was also cast for future reference. The skull and the rest of the body were buried outside the walls of the jail, along with other executed criminals. Old Melbourne Jail was redeveloped in the late 1920s, and the remains of the executed criminals needed to be relocated. When the graves were dug up, the skeletons were more or less intact. Souvenir hunters bagged many of the bones, but the contractor carrying out the excavation managed to save the skull. The remains were reburied, but without Ned Kelly's head. The skull was kept, it seems, in official hands until 1931, when it was housed at the Australian Institute of Anatomy in Canberra, occasionally coming out for display to an eager public fascinated by the ever-growing mythology of the long-dead bushranger. Continued interest later saw the skull placed on permanent display, along with the death mask, at what was by then the Old Melbourne Jail Museum. In 1978 the skull disappeared, stolen, it has been said, by Roman Catholic clergymen wishing to give the remains a decent burial. Whatever the truth of this possibility, at some point after its disappearance a skull came into the possession of Kimberley farmer and Kelly enthusiast Tom Baxter. Tom kept the relic in a plastic box and spent many years talking about it around the country. Many were sceptical, but Tom insisted he had the real deal, clear that he genuinely believed he had the famous skull. This went on until 2009, when archaeologists discovered a mass of skeletons at Pentridge Prison, the site of the 1929 reburial of the bones. Were Ned's bones in this box? DNA testing might prove conclusive, and if so, Tom Baxter's skull could be examined to see if it matched. With much fanfare, Tom handed the skull to the scientists on the 11th of November 2009. Almost 2 years of testing included the DNA of a Kelly family descendant. Scientists determined that Tom Baxter's artifact was not Ned Kelly's skull, but they were at least able to identify the rest of the bushranger's bones and to reassemble them into a fairly complete skeleton. But his skull is still missing. Where is it? Various theories have emerged. Perhaps it was kept as a souvenir by one of the skull-seeking scientists, or it may have been destroyed in the 1929 excavations. These are plausible explanations. Just as plausible is the possibility that it might be lying long forgotten in someone's garden shed. We may never know. There remains one small piece of evidence that could yet solve the mystery. The scientists reassembling the skeleton also found a small piece of skull bone that definitely is Ned Kelly's, probably removed as part of the original decapitation examination process. So if you're on the trail of Ned's skull, and some are, look for one with a hole in the head. If that one can be matched with the piece in the box of bones, the mystery will be solved. Though this final proof may entail yet another interference with the mortal remains, as these were finally buried in the Kelly family's home ground of Greta in 2013. The amount of expertise, time, presumably money, that has been spent on trying to solve this mystery is perplexing to some. Scientific work involved the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, oversees DNA labs, excavation and DNA testing of Kelly descendants. We now know that the skull said to be Ned's was definitely not. We have his bones and a fragment of the true skull. We also have an enduring enigma that resonates with an almost religious fervour. Why? Because Ned Kelly, rightly or wrongly, has become a potent and enduring symbol of Australian identity, along with Waltzing Matilda and the Anzacs. Which is why Ned Kelly continues to generate intriguing stories long after his life, death and skeletal resurrection. Perhaps it was fate. There were a number of unusual messages and statements made by film star Brian Abbott, George Ricard Bell, and others associated with the movie he was making on Lord Howe Island in 1936. Along with 19 other cast and crew, Abbott sailed from Sydney to Lord Howe Island to make a feature film. It was the first movie production of the Commonwealth Film Laboratories and told a tale of shipwreck and murder with a romantic subplot.
Smoke on the horizon, Reverend. Well, they'll soon know we're here. Here goes.
Don't build up that fire yet, can't you?
Why not?
The location and facilities of Lord Howe, then in the early stages of its role as a tourist resort, were ideal for the script and the required authentic Pacific Island setting. To keep the fans back home informed of their progress, leading man Abbott wrote an article for the Australian Women's Weekly. He began with a series of questions to tantalise the readers. Why does a film company take away a staff of artists and technicians to an island in the South Pacific? And what takes place in such circumstances? How does the unit go about making the film? Do the artists work all day long? How are the leisure hours passed? Readers were thrilled to hear about a typical day on the island paradise, which usually began with a pre-breakfast plunge into the warm waters of the sparkling lagoon. The film had a musical angle, so the actors had to practice the theme song. After breakfast, it was all into a boat bound for a beach on the far side of the island for a day's shooting. Abbott wrote that they drank a lot of billy tea on location, returning to their accommodation with fishing lines cast, bag and a 20-pound, 9-kilogram kingfish. After a dinner of fish, they rehearsed, then relaxed with some music on harmonica, concertina and ukulele. We sing, we have supper, we stroll, or we yarn, or we dance, and at length we sleep. Sounds very pleasant. So no wonder Abbott wrote that this lovely isle has completely captivated its film invaders. It wasn't all cups of tea and kingfish though. Abbott mentions storms at sea and overnight marooning of some of the group on the islet due to rough weather. Despite the subtropical surroundings and relaxed leisure time, they were working hard to make a sound film on location and not to stay at home and fake the whole thing. Around this time, Brian Abbott wrote a cryptic private letter to the Women's Weekly. He informed the editors that, "I shall be attempting a very adventurous voyage in October. However, there are strong personal reasons for no word of this trip of mine to be published until it has actually begun." The editors of the magazine later said they had no idea what this might mean, and neither did anyone else then. The film was completed and arrangements were made to leave the island. Brian Abbott and fellow actor Desmond Hay, Leslie Hay Simpson,
"But you're a good sport."
"You're a good sport too. And I thought that you were the murderer."
"No. Peaceful packer, that's me."
decided that they would not return to Sydney with the rest of the cast and crew. Instead, they would take Abbott's small skiff, the Mystery Star, specially shipped to the island for this purpose, and voyage home independently. Seasoned sailors on Lord Howe pointed out that the almost 800-kilometre crossing to Sydney was notoriously dangerous and was best not attempted in a small 16-foot, 4.9-metre craft and with only a compass for navigation. The trip was presumably what Abbott was referring to in his note to the magazine. Perhaps he was being intentionally mysterious to garner some potential publicity. He had always been an adventurer and attention seeker, with a history of daring sea trips, 2 of which ended in near disaster. Whatever their motivations, the pair ignored the advice and loaded up for what they anticipated would be just a 6 to 8 day journey. With food, petrol, luggage, and the 2 passengers, locals thought that the Mystery Star was riding very low in the water. Not long after the 2 stars departed, the weather turned rough. 10 days later, they had still not reached Sydney. A massive air and sea search was mobilised, including a Royal Australian Navy destroyer and 2 Australian Air Force amphibious aircraft, as well as a monoplane. After a few unsuccessful days of scanning the waves, the 2 men were declared lost and the search abandoned. Relatives pleaded for efforts to continue, favouring a possibility that the skiff had made it to the mainland coast and possibly wrecked. The men might be stranded on an island, desperate for help. It was suggested by those who knew the waters that if their motor had run out of fuel or failed, they might have drifted southwards. Sadly, the men were never found, nor any trace of their boat. The disappearance of the 2 stars has remained a mystery ever since. What was the meaning of the odd note Abbott wrote to the Women's Weekly? And why would you send such a note requesting confidentiality to a media organisation? Were there troubles between cast and crew, delaying Abbott's sunny reports? Or were the 2 missing men simply the victims of foul weather and foolhardiness? The movie in which Brian Abbott and Desmond Hay had both featured was released the following year as a support film for main features. Reviewers praised the scenery, but panned the sound quality and lack of suspense. The Sydney Morning Herald critic acknowledged Brian Abbott, whose tragic disappearance followed so soon on the making of the film, is the hero. Like the unfortunate stars, the movie vanished without a trace. It was called Mystery Island.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Mysterious Tales from the Land Down Under. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and hit that notification bell so you're aware when we're posting more mysterious tales.
You know what?
No,
I like you.
you do.
The first time I saw you, I said to myself, there goes an old crab.
You did?
Yeah. What's your name anyway?
Primrose.
Primrose. That's a beautiful name. Beautiful. It just suits you.
Do you think so?
Pot. Yeah.